All right, it's 3 o'clock. The Measure R Oversight Citizens Committee is coming to order. We have a roll call.
Yes. Committee Member Redwine?
Here.
Jones?
Here.
Butler?
Here.
Winnie?
Here.
Weber?
Here.
Thank
All
you.
right. Sounds like we have a full quorum today. Okay. Second thing is we're going to discuss the items related to the transactions for Measure R, which I believe will be going to letter A underneath that, to review the finalized and approved Measure R Oversight Committee fiscal year 21-22 report that I will be presenting on the June 28th supervisors meeting. Did everyone get a copy of it? Was able to review it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any questions on it? Any comments, any changes that we need to make?
I actually have a question on it. On the end of it where it talks about the children's impact statement and the administrative sign-off, is that required? I'm not familiar with that.
It's all part of what's required by the county. That doesn't have much to do with us. I think Neil can answer it better, I think.
Yeah, it's just the set format for all board reports that go to the board for each agenda item. It's something that's been placed on there for years and years. It goes back to, I can't remember what year exactly it was brought forward for any of the board reports or any actions taken by the board, what kind of impact it has on children and families in this community. And so you just typically check the boxes that apply to this. And those boxes may have been left from another report. I'll have to check with the clerk of the board on that to make sure that it applies to this report. But I'll do that before it's finalized and goes to the board. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Was everybody able to look at the financials on the very last page?
Well, let's go ahead and take an action on this, if you don't mind,
No.
Chair Jones.
I'm going to open public comment.
We can do public comment. It's up to, but we have public comment
if you
number
want
C,
to
but
right
you're
now.
welcome to.
It's at the end of the meeting, but we can do it now if you'd like.
You have general public comment. I don't need
Go
to
ahead.
train you guys.
Go ahead, Linda.
Okay, this is irritating. Okay, so on your sheet here, I don't know what this is called, fiscal year review, whatever. On number 2, it says Sheriff's Department, replacement of transport van for inmates. Now, Mr. Lopez said in the last meeting that 3 patrol cars and an inmate van was purchased out of the general fund, not out of the Measure R money. So now we're seeing something entirely different, and you're going to let this go to the public this way. So you might want to review that. There's 2 ways to get a tax passed. One requires 66% of the vote, and the other one requires 50% plus 1. So the general tax is what we voted on, not restricted to certain items. So whenever they tell you that Measure R was just for the fire department, the police department, for other things, it is not. It's a general tax, and it goes into the general fund. So with that in mind, I mean, because if it was supposed to be a restricted tax, it would have probably mentioned that the veteran service would be receiving money, but it did not on the ballot. It had specific items on the ballot, what it was going to be used for. So folks, you need to pay attention to how they're spending the money. You know, $12,000 on livestock? Come on now, what livestock? Public nuisance? Are we using a whole new category now? We don't have, it doesn't come out of the general fund, but it's coming out of the Measure R money. And that's it that I can see. Thank you.
Do you want to respond?
I can respond to the first part of that. Linda, you're correct. The van that was listed in the original draft report has been removed because it wasn't purchased with Measure R. It was actually purchased with other sales tax from the Sheriff's Department. Public safety sales tax. The final report, yes, it'll be amended. You're correct about
Nobody
that.
else caught that?
Oh, yeah, I did.
Yeah. Okay.
And then also, public nuisance falls in line with code enforcement and blight. It's the same department.
Livestock falls under public.
No, I said public nuisance is the same as code enforcement and blight. Livestock would be animal services, most likely.
Yeah, that's ran by the Department of Agriculture, which
So
is,
basically
which is,
what we're
which
doing is
which
general
is
livestock.
animal control. Okay? Because animal control falls under the Department of Agriculture in this county. So unfortunately, because they call it livestock, that's actually going to animal control.
Thank you. That's it, that's all.
Okay. Do we
Okay.
have any?
Do we want to take a vote on this item? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Seeing none? Approved unanimously.
Okay. All right. I guess we're moving on to the next part of our agenda, which is reviewing the year-to-date expenditures.
Clint, you want to take that one?
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So, our last meeting, the Oversight Committee requested profit and loss, a revenue expense statement, which shows in year-to-date how much we received and measure our funding, how much we've spent. And we discussed the methodology of doing the quarterly transfers and then a true-up at year-end. And we decided that we could go ahead and do those true-ups now and use that practice going forward. So there won't be the transfer and then the true-up at the end will be actually hard numbers month in and month out, or quarter in and quarter out. So I went back through as of 6/13 of 22, so last week, and ran a report for all of the expenditures related to Measure R, which in this case is going to be our payroll expenditures, our salary adjustments, and updated those figures. And what I provided today is what we have, as of now, what we've spent on Measure R, what we received on Measure R as of 6/16/22. I think that's when I ran it. So we're all caught up and on the expenditures and revenue. So if you have any questions, feel free, and I'll be happy to go through with you.
Can this be seen online too, as they're looking at the budget? Okay.
And a couple of things I'll point out, if you see, the first part of the report is actually the revenue, and what we received year-to-date is $1,253,774. And the next line down is interest earned on the account, because we do keep those funds separate in their own fund, and they do earn interest. So we make sure we record all interest earned on those monies. And then we go through the process of each individual department. If you look at the sheriff's office, current month, this is a negative 11,000. That's that true-up number. What we've experienced this last year is, say, low staffing at the sheriff's office. So our budgeted amount was based on full staffing. Now that we've actually had lower staffing, I've had to adjust that to actual. And that goes for the jail and probation. Pretty much all of the county departments have had some sort of low staffing this year. And then I do try and, be as accurate as possible. If we talk about the new positions, and say for planning, for example, at 70919, we have 2 planners, and only the second planner was approved for Measure R funds. So when we have 2 planners, I take our second planner and I reimburse from Measure R. But I think it was in April, we lost one of our planners, so then that funding ends. I don't keep continuing because we went down to 1 planner. So I make sure I have hire dates and termination dates and do everything I can to make sure we don't
So in
transfer.
other words, that money from that person leaving just stays in that fund?
Just stays in that fund, yeah. And in this situation, our second planner, that person actually stayed and our first planner left, but we're still down to 1 planner and that wasn't approved. It was for the second planner, so I cut that funding off.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yep.
How could we figure out whether any amount spent here wasn't originally planned to be paid for from the original budget. Because Measure R is supposed to be something extra, right? How do
So-
we know it's extra?
So we'd have to go back to the initial budget that was set with Measure R and then talk about, wage adjustments and the percentage that was increased and paid for by Measure R. We'd have to go back through and compare. So what we're looking at is currently everything on here is in line with what was approved for the Measure R funding.
See, the public is concerned about shifting monies back and forth and kind of going behind the Measure R idea. And I wanted to make sure that we have the right vehicle for us and as well as for the public to know that anything that we are spending our money on is truly in addition to, so there's no exchange of funds.
Yeah, the next level we can go down for that level of detail is going to be my working documents, which are public. I don't normally produce those for reports. I usually have the summary report, but we can look into those. Like for example, with the wage adjustments at the sheriff's office, I have every single employee lined out and how much they made and 10% off of that. But those aren't something that I normally, unless requested, would bring to a board.
Okay, I have another question, and maybe that's an overall question. You can always tell me to ask the same question a little bit later, but how does the public know what our job as the Oversight Committee really is? There are expectations out there in the population that seems to expect that we have a say-so in number one, how the money is being spent, that we have a veto right, that we have an advisory position. I would like to, at some point, kind of clarify our own role because we are being looked at, hey, you guys are not doing your job. And the way I see it, we have basically the same information that the public gets to see just a few weeks before them or a month before them, and we're able to ask questions, but only questions about items that have already been accomplished. Nothing, we have no advisory on our part. We have nothing to do with how the money is being spent. We're basically a group of quote-unquote whistleblowers who then, by asking questions, then can go to the public and say, hey, public, something doesn't smell right. Is there a way that the public can be educated in that manner so there's no expectation out there that's being placed upon us that is not warranted?
Here's the problem, what people.
Can you
heard
please
from
come up to the
last-
mic?
Oh, I'm sorry.
What people heard from this last meeting, what was demonstrated was, and I'm not saying this to be mean, but Mr. Jones appeared to make it seem as though it was you guys against the public, and that's not what you're here for. You're just here to make sure that it's appropriately spent. You're not here to make decisions on how it is spent, but just to make sure it is appropriately what it said in the ballot, and that's your guideline right there. And if they're spending it elsewise, there's nothing you can do about it but report about it. So that's what the purpose of the Oversight Committee is, to protect our precious funds and report whether they're spending them accurately or not. That's my understanding of what the Oversight does. You don't get to make decisions on how the money is spent, but you have, as you're protecting the funds that we're receiving, and you're reporting whether they're being spent accurately or not.
Well, just for your information as well, that use of the Measure R money is extremely broad.
It is.
And basically covers the whole spectrum of how it can be spent.
That's why
and with minor restrictions. And so basically, I just didn't want to I wanted to make sure that the public knew.
They do understand that part. And the
Okay.
reason they understand it is through the school district and how they've been running things, so, yeah. All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Linda's correct. You guys are an oversight function only, as established by the resolution passed by the Board of Supervisors. The main function for this committee is to make sure that as the board has budgeted the funds for vital services in the community, that they're spent that way. And if they're not, to report to the public that they've been spent incorrectly or that they've supplanted other funds. So it's for new services.
And not to go to administrative costs.
I actually have a question. I think you brought up a good point of how do we know that the money is not being backdoored from the general fund to the Measure R? Is there a way to show what was budgeted? You know, we want to make sure that there's not things that you guys had in the budget, and then when you know Measure R was coming through, well, let's take this out and we'll just take it back when it should have been left where it was at.
Can I jump in there? I've overseen other budgets that, like 30 million plus. And in those reports, when we would get the reports annually, we would also not only have that current year that we're looking at, but we would also have, with each line item, we would have a history of how much was spent in the previous year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I even saw, I think, as far back as 15 years. And then we would have discussions. Why is there a change from last year in this particular line item as opposed to this year? And, you know, it would be described to us from the accounting department why there was a change in that variance of it. Is there something, because I don't recall seeing it on the website. I mean, all I can recall seeing on the website is the previous years are on there, but there's nothing that meshes them together that you can look at them and do a comparison without printing or having all of them up at one point. Is there a manner, you know, like the Excel spreadsheet that was used, it had it already listed there. So we would have a nice printout. And that way you got a better opportunity of doing the comparison thing. Because I believe someone had told me that there was a comparison made at one of these recent, what do they call those? The election campaign people talking. That a previous sheriff made the comment that he didn't use he used money out of his fund in order to purchase vehicles. Didn't require it from anywhere else. Now, that was many years ago, and when I look at that, or think about that, things could have changed in the 10 years from when that person was able to, in their budget, take a line item, make a purchase of a vehicle. Things could have changed. Like, for example, worker comp insurance. Over the last 5 years, work comp insurance has gone up a lot. So the department may have to make adjustments in their line items in order to handle that additional cost in that line item, and therefore other line items suffer. So again, I'm just wondering if there's a way that we can, for the public's sake as well, it's great that the budgets are online, but if there's another way of doing the comparisons from the year to years, and the variances and the differences, you know, with including from the specific departments as well. So we can see, like 2 years ago, how much did the sheriff's department spend on vehicles? How many did they purchase? What did they do? And, you know, that way it draws a better, it shows the better comparison.
I can jump in. So on our accounting website, yeah, we don't really, at the current moment, have a tool that would show budgeted from year to year to see if there is a variance. I can create those documents for the committee if you'd like. When it comes to Measure R in particular, we don't have any prior detail yet, right? This is our first year doing it, so I think that'd be a valuable tool we can use, you know, going in year after year to see our differences and how much we budget and actually expensed. This current year Measure R is just the first year going. But yeah, I understand, I do see, you know, how much are we spending year to year, what's the variance, is there an increase or decrease? And in these specific line items, a lot of it has to do with payroll, for example. And, you know, in our current climate with having a high number of unemployment, you know, positions vacant, those numbers do get skewed. But yeah, we don't have, like, for lack of a better term, we don't have something on the public website that does the year to year, maybe we should. So that's something I can definitely look into. And as a committee, if you're requesting those documents, I can create those things for you and bring it back.
Yeah, because I mean, you're pointing out the example that I'm giving is this is the first year for Measure R funds. So if we saw the previous 2 years and we saw how those departments were spending the funds, it would help to support our report that says we haven't seen any general funds being supplanted by and following what the Measure R was supposed to be. That would be that would be a better comparison, a better way of us being able to show the public that yes, we came to this because this understanding and this report because we reviewed such and such documents, but we should also have it out there for the public to be able to see something like that too.
Yeah, it is our intention going forward to put something on the county website that is directly related to Measure R and how the funds are being used. For the wage adjustments, none of those were approved prior to Measure R. So all the wage adjustments that were geared towards law enforcement were after Measure R, as you guys know. You guys have asked tons of really good questions throughout this process, so knowing that even the positions that were funded by Measure R are all brand new positions. They weren't in the county staffing structure before Measure R. And Paul, when you talk about fixed assets, we do the best we can through our commissioner Winning, sorry about that, our committee member Winning. When we go through our budget process, fixed assets for general fund departments are few and far between for the 22 years that I've been here. And when it comes to vehicles for the sheriff's department, I mean, of course, that's a mandated piece of equipment and a required piece of equipment for safety and to provide services to this community. But I mean, each year, it is a battle to try to find funding in order to replace vehicles that have reached a certain mileage threshold and have also come to a point where you're maintaining them constantly because of their age and because of the mileage on them. And so in order to replace those, I don't care which sheriff you've talked to over the last 20-something years that I've been here and dealing budgets, it is very few times that we have to replace these vehicles, and we can come up with maybe funding for 2 or 3 of them every 3, 4, 5 years. Just because we have to. Their vehicles are at that stage where you have to replace them. It's not an ongoing expenditure. There are not assets in the fixed or in the general fund that are there every single year. So when the Measure R funding came around, it was a mechanism that the sheriff came forward to us and said, can we use this funding to actually get a system set up where we can get more reliable turnover for our vehicles so we have safe and reliable vehicles going forward. And that's why some of the vehicles were included in the Measure R funding, which of course was we were able to purchase that with public safety sales tax instead of Measure R.
I mean, you give a good example. Again, we're talking about the vehicles again. There are a lot of people that do not understand that there's penal code that it's associated with. It can only have so many miles on it, safety. So for me, the way I also look at that is that the legislators have legislated penal code for a specific thing, but in budgets, they don't then include the funding for that. They're going to say, penal code, you got to have it replaced after so many hundreds of thousands of miles, but we're not going to budget it for you.
So I'm kind of curious, do you know about when you realized you would need Measure R funds for the van and the patrol cars?
We actually had the sheriff's department come forward to us, the 2 of us, Clint, myself, and Randy, who was on the budget team. They said that they were projections for their regular public sales tax was above projections, and that they were able to fund them through that mechanism as opposed to Measure R. And so with the Measure R funding being accounted for in a separate fund and able to be used for general services, and people have been talking about infrastructure and road projects all along, but those are extremely costly, and so we're trying to build up a fund balance in that fund, if we're able to, moving forward, to actually try to address some of the infrastructure issues in the county by leveraging other funds from state and federal government by having these Measure R funds. I can speak to from experience that we haven't had general fund or general use type funds to match state and federal funds in the past, even though they were available. Measure R is one of those mechanisms that we're hopeful will build up a fund balance, and we'll be able to do that.
But what I'm curious about is when you knew that you would not need the Measure R funds for the vehicles.
I think it was April. I'd have to look back because it went to the board. It actually went to the board and it was approved for the increase in their revenue, their public safety revenue projections in order to fund the purchase of the vehicles in the van.
So we weren't aware, when we set the budget going into the year and budgeted for the van, we weren't aware of the potential increase in the sales tax dollars being received. And once we realized there were going to be more sales tax dollars received than what we initially thought, that's when the sheriff's office asked to come forward, and we just went ahead and used the local, or the Prop 172, the quarter cent safety sales tax for the vans, and then we're able to hold back Measure R money and unspend it, not spend the Measure R funds. So it was part of the initial budget. We didn't have money in the general fund for the vans. It was a Measure R purchase.
Right.
Once we realized that the general fund money was going to exceed projections, we used those funds instead of Measure R.
Because what caught my attention, this report we got on those purchases was May 2nd. So if it happened in April, I'm wondering why it was on that report in May.
The purchase of what?
The 3 vehicles and the van.
The purchase of the vehicles hasn't taken place yet. I think they've purchased a van. They still haven't had it upfitted. So it's just been the availability of vehicles. They can't even find them right now. It was approved, but the purchases have not been made.
I have another question. For the last meeting we had, we got a lot of documents from all the department heads. My understanding, are those going to go to the Board of Supervisors as well, those associated documents? No? They were just for this committee? Okay.
Yes, it's an annual requirement for any department that receives Measure R funds to draft a report and send it to the committee so basically telling you how they spent the funds. And then that's the oversight part of the committee to make sure that the funds were spent as budgeted.
If the Board of Supervisor asks to see those, they would be able to
Yes.
review them?
Yes,
Okay.
of course.
I know, I did too.
And hearing the committee, and I think it's going to be pretty important moving forward, and I can talk to Clint about this, is to provide the transaction detail for each of the transfers that are made from Measure R to other departments for operating expenses that have been approved and budgeted. We'll get the transaction detail for you going forward.
That would probably make it a lot easier for us to be able to have it, and if we can get that put into the website at some point, that way it's more transparent.
That won't be a problem. I think we're kind of working together on this one. So last meeting we didn't have this report, and so now we have the year-to-date report. And if the committee wants to provide more detail, we absolutely can do that. I have it. I can produce that.
I think it'd be better that way. It's on the website. That way, it's a little bit more transparent. So, I mean, there's always a question of transparency at this point.
Yeah, not a problem.
Yeah,
I mean, I do all that work already in the transaction, so I can definitely provide that.
This brings me to another point. I'm not sure whether this goes along with the numbers, but at some point, the members of this committee had to collaborate. And I'm worried about the Brown Act. And I think just for transparency, I have sent you my opinion on whether we should be covered by the Brown Act or not. Has there been any change in how we are being viewed at this point? I've given you the exact page and also the points why I don't believe that we should fall under the Brown Act.
This is really not, this is not an item that's agendized, but
Okay.
I'll speak to it really briefly. According to our county council, he believes this committee does fall under the Brown Act, and it was in the resolution that was passed by the Board of Supervisors. And so I will actually provide him the information like I told you I would, and let him take a look at it, and let him render another opinion.
Okay, we can talk about it afterwards, because
absolutely.
even if you throw a duck in an alligator pond, it doesn't make it an alligator, it becomes food. So whether you apply all the rules of the Brown Act to us or not is meaningless to me. I want to see how we fall under it. I need somebody to point it out why this one doesn't apply to us.
Yes, no problem. The information was just received last week. I'll look
Okay.
into it.
Yeah, because to that point, we asked at the very first meeting if we needed to have, county emails rather than using our personal emails. Because going forward, I'm not going to be responding to my personal emails from you guys. I want to request a county one, so I won't be using mine.
Again, this is not agendized, but yes, we can do that. I can work with our IT department to make sure that happens.
Training sessions as well.
All right.
I think we're done with the agenda.
I think we're done with the agenda, too. Any other questions we may have? Any?
Hey, actually, on the report, you're going to put an amendment regarding the ban? Or a clarification, or what's going to go on that report?
It's already been done. The final draft does not have the van in there. I think you have a copy of that also, Linda.
Yeah,
in your-
it does have a van in there.
Well, then you didn't get the final copy, so I'll make sure that you do.
No, I did not get the final. You mean this or this? This is what they wrote. Yeah, it says the van is in there.
Make sure you get one.
Yeah, it doesn't say it on the reports that
Okay.
I
Whatever,
got, yeah.
What I got and what you guys have are two different things.
Right, because when you read it off to me, I was like, whoa, where'd she get that from? Because I didn't have it.
That's what the county provided me.
I want to chime in a little bit. It's a two-step process. We lay out our budget beginning of the year with expectations, and then as we go through the year, we have reality. And in the case of the van or the cars, we found that, one, they were unavailable due to supply and demand. And then when we did find there were other avenues of revenue to pay for the vans that we thought was a better use and save our Measure R funds, is what we ended up doing. So as we go through this process together, there's going to be the initial budget of approval, and then there's going to be potentially adjustments based on things like they're not available. So there may have been 3 vehicles approved for purchase through Measure R funds, but lack of inventory, it doesn't happen. So those are things that I think, as we meet and discuss, that'll come through and be transparent as possible, so we all know what's happening. Again, we budgeted for X amount of money for wage adjustments, and then we get through the fiscal year and we find that our employment was down, so we don't hit that number. And that's just a matter of we didn't have the employees to tie to the expense. So there's a budget we set and we approve and move forward, and then as we go through the year, we find what the actual is. So it's kind of a living document. And at this time of year, I'll give you all the actuals and what's what and where the money went.
Okay. Anything else? Yes?
One more thing. You want me to come up there?
Yes. This is being broadcast.
So somewhere in this hot mess, I read that you guys only have to meet once a year. Hopefully, that's not a fact, because in order to keep track of everything, you're going to have to meet, more than once a year, obviously. So, yeah, this is a mess. So thank you for your time and your service. The end.
Just to be
yeah.
clear, this is what, our 6th meeting? This is our 6th meeting, so we don't meet annually. We've met about every, 2 to 3 months? On average?
Something like that.
So we have met, and I'm pretty sure they're all online. So we have met more than annually, and we've been keeping a fairly tight track of what's been going on. So we meet a lot more than what's required. Just like the report that's going to be read next week is not required. all that's required is for us to have the report given to the Board of Supervisors. But that will be read into the minutes. Just for clarification.
And I also want to make, clarify that I did at the last meeting as well, that in the resolution, the committee has, you have the, if you want to meet prior to the adopted budget, we can also schedule a meeting, because as of next Tuesday, the recommended budget will go to the board for spending authority as of July 1, but the actual adopted final budget process will be from July through September. And so the committee is, I'm assuming, going to want to meet between those few months to look at the final budget
Yeah, we'll probably
and have
meet-
any discussions that
Yeah,
are
we'll probably
necessary.
meet, what, the end of July, maybe? End of July, maybe, 1st of August?
Yeah, we can work with you on a schedule.
Yeah, we were talking about August, I think, at the last meeting, just so we could get a handle on it for the next fiscal year. Okay. Do we have any other questions? Got to do it one last time. All right, do I have a motion for an adjournment? Okay. The seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? Meeting's adjourned.